Good morning, everybody. We are now going to start the press conference.
We have first question here, Foro Noticioso. Celia, go ahead.
Buenas tardes, Medina, por las expresiones que usted hizo anteriormente.
Based on the statements you made earlier about the pensions, I want to ask you if there could be a risk for the pensions of PREPA retirees or not. Well, let's look at what is happening. The pension fund of PREPA is about to be without any money. And I see it as our responsibility, shared with the administration and the management of PREPA, to ensure that pensioners will receive their pensions. If you look at what we were able to do for the Commonwealth, we ended up with a pay-go system where pensions are paid from collections from that year. And I can't tell you how the bankruptcy will be resolved for PREPA because it's still before the court. But my personal opinion is that priorities must be to ensure pensions and achieve the lowest increase possible for consumers. We also have to take into account the rights of creditors who lent the money, and the judge ultimately will give us her ruling. But the pensions must definitely be at the top of our priorities. There's no risk for the pensions? Right now, PREPA's pension plan is about to run out of funds. Our role is to find a solution for that. I can't provide you the solution until it has
Robert,
been
do you want
defined.
to add something to that?
Yeah. Voy a hablar inglés, pero...
I'll speak English.
Let's go back for a second. First, the record of the board with regards to the pensions has been clear. On the earlier presentation, we talked about we're funding the pensions for 600,000 employees that were not funded before going forward. That's the investment that's made. It's been a priority. It's in the fiscal plan. The funding for PREPA's pension fund, right, up until a month ago, or up until about 2 months ago, we were under the impression that the pension fund was funded through the third or fourth quarter of 2024. 2 months ago, or less, we were notified that those assumptions were wrong by the trust, by PREPA, that those assumptions were wrong, and that they would run out of money as early as April of this year. We then worked with the government and funded all of made payments up until the end of June. So it's fully funded through July 1st. That's to the end of that fiscal year. For the next fiscal year, we're working with the government, and we've identified resources that are owed to PREPA. So it's their own resources, it was liabilities that were owed to PREPA that will be able to fund the liabilities beyond July 1 through towards the end of 2024. During that time, we're working on the plan. The plan of adjustment is going through the courts. The pension liabilities are an obligation of PREPA. They're a cost of PREPA. They're part of the plan of adjustment. So there's this lag between the time of when the POA is resolved and when the pension fund runs out of money. So there's sufficient money from now until July 1st. We've also identified resources to take it past July 1st all the way to the third quarter of 24. We hope the plan of adjustment is in place by then, and then we'll identify any resources that are needed after that. But we can't get ahead of the plan of adjustment. No one is missing their pension payments. We expect that no one is going to miss their pension payments. It has been a priority, and I think the board has a strong record of protecting the pension payments, which is why we're spending, right, billions of dollars setting up a trust fund to protect the pension payments going forward. So it's an obligation of PREPA. They did not have sufficient resources. It is being dealt with in the plan of adjustment, but right now no payments have been missed, and we don't anticipate that payments will be missed while the plan of adjustment works itself through the courts.
Thank you. Next question is Telemundo, José Esteves.
Sí, Medina, me refiero más a usted porque necesitamos en español, a base de lo que acaba de decir.
Based on what Mr. Mujica just stated and what you mentioned about PAYGO, we are talking about the fact that this about the pensions will depend year after year on government collections revenues. And so in a year where collections are not good, then would those pensions be at risk? Or okay, very well. I'll repeat what Robert mentioned in Spanish now, and I'll provide more details about PAYGO and the plan. In terms of the PREPA pensions, funds have been identified in the short term to make sure that but until the end of the fiscal year, pensions will be paid, and we've also identified funds for the start of the fiscal year until the end of the year so that pensions will be paid adequately. And this is important because the adjustment plan is before the court currently. And although we included the payment of pensions as part of the adjustment plan, until the judge doesn't make a ruling, her final ruling, even and if it's appealed, also it will go to the circuit court or wherever it has to go. The plan will not be final. So what we're proposing at this time is to identify the funds, or we have identified the funds in the short term. It's important to mention also that we really found out, the members of the board, merely months ago, that the PREPA pension plan was running out of money this year. And what we had been informed and the analyses that had been shared with us informed us that the PREPA's pension plan had sufficient funds to pay the pensions adequately until 2024, at some point in 2024. So we've been agile in terms of resolving this matter in the short term. Our intention is that no pensioner will not receive a check. And I feel comfortable that within the plan of adjustment, pensions are contemplated, but we do have to wait for the plan of adjustment to go through its course before the courts, and then a final decision is issued so that it can then be implemented, and we can have that financial structure to finance it. And with regard to the PAYGO question, we not only created the PAYGO, but we also created a pension fund. If you remember, in the prior meeting that we held here in this venue, the board of directors of that trust was introduced, and investments have been made with part of the surplus in that fund to complement what is called PAYGO. The reality is that the PAYGO is at its highest point right now, and as time passes, we know that there is a reduction of people because no new people will not be accessing the system. That's why there's a freeze. So with time, PAYGO will go down. The percentage will be lower, the total percentage of collections budget for each year, but we're contemplating aggressively with the creation of the retirement trust, and the funds for that come from surpluses.
Próxima pregunta del Canal 6. It caught my attention. You said you wanted to speak as a Puerto Rican apart from being a board member. And you mentioned why you wanted to be part of this board. And then you mentioned federal funding. And one of the things that you said was that you wanted to see how to use that federal funding. And my question is, what about the money that has gotten to Puerto Rico during, like, whether it's for Hurricane Maria, the earthquakes, the pandemic, etc.? So far, with you as a Puerto Rican, as a board member, how have you seen these funds being used? In Puerto Rico, there's a perception that they're being released slowly. As a Puerto Rican, first, I want to highlight again the intention, my intention, both when I was in PRICO, private business, in the private sector, and now with the board. My intention is to create a better Puerto Rico, and I want to be clear on that. That's why I'm working in the board and contributing in any way I can for the future of our island and our children. Now, in regards to the reconstruction funds, I think it's clear that the disbursement has been super slow. Since the beginning of the hurricane funding, hurricane funding came in, there have been various reasons by which the deployment of those funds have been at a slower pace than what we wished. But I think that you also have to look at Core 3 today, in the present. And if you look at the curve of investments, we've seen how in the last at least 2 years, I know that that curve has accelerated in terms of the project model. You can see it in the streets and the roads. Not everything's perfect. We know that we can't cover the sun with a finger, but throughout Puerto Rico, we're seeing different reconstruction projects, both on a municipal level and on a state project level. Therefore, we are starting to see that work. We still have a lot of money left throughout the next 10 years. And again, the details are in the fiscal plan that we presented. But there's a lot of money left still, and part of the money focuses on economic development. Our position, and we are beginning this process, is that as the board wraps up the PREPA's restructuring, which is the last government entity that is bankrupt, our focus should turn from now until the board ends operations, whenever that is. We need to ensure that the financial foundations are as solid as possible, and we are going to help the process any way we can. The board doesn't have a direct role. It's the administration, the Economic Development Department, Manuel Sidre, the governor with his team, Omar Marrero, FOMB, and the State Department with his team. So it needs to be a product of teamwork. And someone mentioned earlier, it has to be along with the business community and the entrepreneurial community of Puerto Rico, because the economic development of a country is not just the responsibility of the government or even a board, much less. It needs to be a joint responsibility when we, as she managed to improve the permit system, where we can improve the fiscal system, make it more competitive, and to streamline government process so that it's easier to do business in Puerto Rico, while at the same time we're using some of these funds to enable industries, businesses, and to nurture them, those areas that allow us to grow our economy. We need the person speaking to use the microphone, please, in order to interpret. We need to work towards a future together. We're all Puerto Rican. We might have different points of view. We might have different preferences in different topics, but we all have the great concern of improving the
Mr.
country
Chairman,
for our children.
Robert, do you want to add something to that?
No, everything.
It's okay. We will pass to the questions on the reporters online. I think John Marino has a question. John. Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was muted.
It happens. Go ahead.
The mediation team reported this week that there are no active negotiations between the oversight committee's bondholders, despite Judge Sneed's repeated statements directing parties to mediate outstanding disagreements regarding the proposed plan of adjustment. I'm just wondering what the board's view on why mediation talks are not taking place, and do you think they can restart prior to confirmation hearings? And if mediation does do, what open issues do you expect to be discussed?
Chairman?
I'll just say, I missed a bit of your question because your words were cutting in and out, but I really don't have a lot to add beyond they're not active mediation going on right now. The board is always open to mediation, and we're always open to discussions in and out of mediation, but I can't get into details beyond that because of the nature of mediation.
But are talks going on outside of mediation?
there always are conversations going on outside of media. I mean, they're constant conversations.
Okay. One follow-up quickly. Board Member Peterson suggested using Commonwealth surplus funding to reach a consensual deal with holders. Is that something the board would support?
I'll just speak for myself and say two things about that. One is the Commonwealth doesn't have extra money lying around. The money that the Commonwealth has is needed for things like making sure Puerto Rico is ready for future disasters and the priorities in the fiscal plan. And then the second thing I'll say is the Commonwealth is not the borrower here. PREPA is the one that borrowed the money.
Okay, thank you. We have an more question, Alex.
Mojica, le voy a preguntar en español, pero no quiero hablar
I'm going to
inglés.
use Spanish. I don't want to speak English. You said that there are funds identified to pay pensions for PREPA pensioners. Are these funds from private entities that owe money to the government? What amount are we talking about? Is it are the funds coming from mixed channels? I want to know more about the money you found in order that's going to be allocated to pay those pensions.
The rate that we're spending is about $30 million a month, right? And again, a few weeks ago, we were told that it was $22 million a month, and then the number keeps changing. So now we're at $30 million a month. The funds come from they're PREPA's funds, basically. So they come from PREPA's funds. Initially, we've identified their funds within their budget, and those were funded through the end of the year from PREPA's own funds. There's been an ongoing controversy around other funds that have been owed to PREPA. So there are outstanding liabilities from different agencies that have owed PREPA money and have not paid those liabilities. So we've gone through, we've identified some that we think are actually owed to them and some that we're not sure yet. For the ones that we think are owed, those can carry you another few months, and we think we can get you through October, potentially, with those other funds. They're not Commonwealth funds. These are all funds that are rightfully owed to PREPA. We've identified they hadn't been paid, they haven't moved. We've been spending a lot of time identifying what resources does PREPA have that we could use to this. And like I said, until we get to a plan of adjustment where we have a more longer-term fix.
Ha dado a entender que le han dado información errónea.
You
¿Quiénes
said
le han
that
dado
you've been
información
giving
errónea?
wrong information. Who has given you the wrong information? The people from PREPA or who at the government? Because evidently, if at some point they give you a certain information and that wasn't correct, and you've mentioned that twice, who is giving you the wrong information? And what's the reason for you to be given that wrong information?
And it's either PREPA or the pension trust. I'm not sure which. They have actuaries that do the analysis as to how much is owed. So at different times, the actuarial analysis has changed. Some of it could be related to inflationary costs. So I'm not saying that there was either an error. It could just be the estimates change sometimes, actuaries change, but the numbers have changed significantly and twice. So they changed, like I said. We were under the assumption that we were going to be fully funded through the middle of 24. Then all of a sudden we're notified. We were notified, and the government was notified at the same time through the same letter, which I think you've seen because it has been public, because it was made public by who notified us, that there's going to be a shortfall. And then we immediately acted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a missed payment.
Okay, thank you so much. Vocero Istra.
Muy buenas tardes, buenos días. Me gustaría saber
Good afternoon. I would like to know the fiscal plan that you presented. Is it different, and in which parts is it different than the one that the government submitted? I would like to know also about what the Representative Mariana Nogales asked in terms of the possibility of mining exploitation or mining businesses in Puerto Rico, and what prevents you from talking about this topic? Is it something that you foresee in a short-term future? I would like to
I
know
can answer
about
on
those
the
two
fiscal
things.
plan issue. We work very closely with the governor's staff on preparing it, and it's aligned with the governor's priorities. Sometimes the difference really relates to a difference in how much funding that we think is actually available, right? So it really comes down to, we all have very similar spending priorities, but it comes down to how much do we think is available next year, and then how much we think is going to be recurring in multiple years. So where there be differences is in where we may think that revenues might be one time, but because of the post-COVID recovery, those revenues might not repeat, so we might want to not have continued spending, over time. And what the discussions are with the government is, we can revisit some of these things, right, as things clear. But some of the discussions about municipal fundings for municipalities, he's established that as a priority of his. We recognize that priority, and that's why we're saying, we recognize it's a priority, but there are things that we think the municipal governments can do in order to do that. The governor has a proposal on tax reform that he's been very public on, and again, we have principled stand on tax reform, what the principles should be in any tax reform package. And then we have, there's funding in there for civil service reform and and the increases in healthcare infrastructure, and these are all things that we are aligned on with the administration.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Minería.
Do you want to say anything about that?
I don't really have,
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll have to look into it.
Yeah, I'll have to look into it, because I don't know the specifics of it, so I have to.
Yeah, we'll have to look into the mining issues. That may or may not be something that would be a board involvement issue. It may well be the government's decision whether to pursue or not pursue, but we'll need to look into it. And
For me, it's the first time I'm hearing of that issue at all, so I have no knowledge of anything that's related to what you discussed, so we'd have to look into it.
Simplemente no saben del.
No, I don't know anything.
Oh, so you don't know? So you
I've
don't
never
know
heard
about-
that issue before, so it's not a confidentiality issue. No one has come to me on this issue. I don't know anything about this issue. It's the first time I'm hearing of it.
Well, I'll say, since we don't know anything about it, this is something that Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote her law school comment on, is mining, at least offshore mining. And that's the last I've heard about it, is reading her law school note.
Se ha hablado también de una vez se termine la reestructuración de la
Also,
deuda.
once PREPA's debt restructuring is done, surely, probably this year, how much more time do you think that the board will stay after that's done? And how much longer do you estimate that you will remain working in Puerto Rico?
The Promesa statute clearly lays out the termination requirements. It's 4 consecutive budgets prepared under modified accrual, 4 consecutive balanced budgets under modified accrual, and then access to capital markets. Access to capital markets is actually the first condition. And then the balanced budgets and the modified accrual is actually the second. So we're making progress on the balanced budgets, we hope. We haven't seen the audited financials yet. Modified accrual is a relatively high standard because the government had been operating under a cash basis before. Other municipalities and jurisdictions that have entered into bankruptcy have come out with the requirement for modified accrual. So it's a standard requirement when you're coming out of bankruptcy. When we see the audited financial statements, we'll know more. Market access is also something that we are now focused on, because you have to meet, the market access is not a condition that the board creates. It is something that the financial markets require in order to, issue debt again. And some of those things include controlling spending, having a good financial management in place, and the board has a very strong financial management agenda that we are focused on, so that there is all of the conditions in place, so that when the financial when the creditors come in and look and say, there's a strong foundation here. Building in reserves is also really important so that you can weather economic storms. You can weather actual storms, and you can weather economic downturns. And we've been working with the government, and the government's been cooperative about setting aside reserves for that purpose as well. So the timing of it is difficult to understand until we have the audited financials. Market access is a little bit more complicated, but as long as the government's making the responsible decisions, right, the path is being laid for that exit. And we're getting closer to that day as you move forward, but we don't have, the specific timing is difficult to assess until we have all of that information.
Thank you. Any other question? The guys online, do you have any other question? ¿Alguien tiene alguna otra pregunta? No?
Right?
So we finish this press conference.
Great. Thanks, Yvette. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.